I'm sorry, Fatima, but I believe there's no sound coming from the video. Yep, all good now. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Fatima. And that was the introduction for our first speaker, Shermeen, age 16. Now, Shermeen, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Auntie. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. My name is Shermeen Chung, and I'm 16 years old. I'm from JCI Junior Penang Chinese Girls High School. I'm an ordinary girl with extraordinary dreams. Ever since I was 14 years old, I've always dreamt of attending one of the most prestigious universities in the world, Harvard University. A wise man once said, "So many of our dreams at first seem impossible. Then they seem improbable. And then when we summon the wheel, they soon become inevitable." It is actually amazing to have something in mind at all times, something that keeps you going. Because I noticed that when your heart is set on something, everything starts moving. You're progressing without even realizing it. You may pick up the tiniest lessons, although you are still lacking. What's important is that you are doing something and you feel good about it. I truly believe that with a sense of hope, the things you think impossible 5 years ago could end up a reality someday. And that's why when we dream, dream big. My sharing title for today is a 16-year-old girl's journey to achieve sustainable development goals. I'll be talking about 3 aspects. I'll share my experience in organizing a virtual junior camp, as well as my experience in participating in an SDG innovation challenge. Besides, I will also share about the social inequalities in the blind and visually impaired community in Malaysia. First of all, how do I know about the SDGs? On the 22nd of May, I attended an online training on SDGs. My first impression is that the SDGs were way bigger than me and beyond my capability as an individual to accomplish. I thought that we could only implement the SDGs by participating in large-scale projects. After doing some research, I realized that we could implement the SDGs in our daily life. For instance, by replacing one-use plastic bags with biodegradable or reusable options, we could contribute to SDG 13, climate change, and SDG 14, life below water. Within 2 months' time of learning about the SDGs, I got the opportunity to organize a virtual junior camp under the supervision of my club's mother chapter, JCI Pearl. The camp was mainly focused on SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. A total of 121 participants joined our camp. We were really honored to have Ms. Soel, the director of this youth summit, to conduct a SDG training session for us during this camp. She shared a few videos to introduce the SDGs to the participants so that they could have a clearer idea of the SDGs. This SDG training session enabled them to create their own projects in alignment with the SDGs in the future. After that, the participants were divided into 10 groups. They were then assigned to their respective breakout rooms in Zoom to discuss about SDG 16. They were given approximately 30 minutes to write a problem statement and propose solutions in a presentation regarding SDG 16. All of the groups managed to perform well, and these are the topics that they have presented. They all are very relevant to our society today, and the participants displayed great concern over these issues. After the camp ended, we sent out an evaluation form for all the participants to fill in. I'm so glad that we received great responses for the SDG training session. As you can see, most of the participants consider the SDG training session as well as the group presentation session to be beneficial to them. Next, I'll be talking about my experience competing in the Monash University Foundation Year Innovation Challenge. It is considered a SDG innovation competition. On the 19th of June, I was able to lead my team to victory. Our team innovated a system called STARI to address the loss of independence among the blind community. And that's all for my experiences with the SDGs. It is quite surprising that I participated in an SDG competition as well as became the organizing chairperson of a virtual junior camp within 2 months' time knowing about the SDGs. It was indeed a remarkable journey for me. Both of these experiences allowed me to step out of my comfort zone as I tried things that I've never tried before. I was able to gain more in-depth knowledge about the Sustainable Development Goals as well as the blind and visually impaired community. My perspective changed due to this, and I now view things differently and more inclusively. I'm now able to approach issues with a more society-focused lens. I hope that I can contribute to society and do my country a service through my newfound perspective. Hence, I will now be presenting my research on the blind and visually impaired community as well as the social inequalities they face. A little disclaimer before I continue. I'm not representing any entity or organization when I talk about this. I'm speaking from an ordinary citizen's perspective. All information included in this presentation has been checked and verified by my friend Sun Si, who grew up in close proximity with the blind and visually impaired individuals. All right, there are 4 major factors that influence a person's ability to have good quality of life, which are access to equitable education, access to meaningful employment, access to essential services, and independent mobility. I'll be talking about how our current society fails to meet the visually impaired community's needs in each of these factors. Firstly, there is the lack of accessible resources for the blind and visually impaired in Malaysia. We live in an age where we can find any and all the information we need at a click of a mouse. However, this is not the case for the visually impaired. The majority of websites and online domains are not blind-friendly. For instance, there are no alt text for images. Alt text is a contraction for alternative text. It is a short written description of an image, which makes sense of that image when it can't be viewed for some reason. Furthermore, there are no explicit or descriptive labels for links and buttons for the blind and visually impaired. Besides, websites are also largely dependent on visual icons and color associations. Because of the way these websites are designed, important information is either lost in translation or can't even be translated using screen readers, making it very difficult and inaccessible for the blind. Even the analog options like textbooks, workbooks, and reference books, which any students should have access to, are limited in supply when it comes to real versions and cannot be obtained easily. Next, there is also a lack of suitable equipment in schools. From my personal perspective, schools should prepare working and usable equipment for visually impaired students so that they are able to learn properly along with their peers. Basic equipment should be implemented and maintained in schools so that we can facilitate conducive learning environments for the visually impaired. Technology is no longer a luxury, but a necessity even in educational facilities. This is true for the blind as well. The blind and visually impaired in Malaysia also stuck in an unfair education system. Very few teachers are trained to handle disabled students. And even those who have been specially trained to help students with disabilities are frequently misassigned. For example, an educator trained to aid the deaf or mute being assigned to students with visual impairments. Although they are teachers trained in special education, oftentimes they are not the ones actually teaching the subjects to the disabled students, but are rather there to provide peripheral support. What this means is that while special education teachers are trained to modify the general education curriculum to meet the disabled child's individual needs, they may not be particularly knowledgeable in each of the subjects that this student needs to learn. As such, there are noticeable gaps in a disabled student's education. The disabled are unable to receive the same education as the able, making for an unfair system that is geared toward the sighted. In order for our education system to be equitable, teaching aids and materials should be provided for both the teachers teaching the blind and the blind themselves. Teaching methods and strategies should also be developed in order to help blind students master their curriculum. Secondly, the blind and visually impaired also face challenges in employment. There are limited opportunities in fields related to STEM. This is because of the inequitable education a blind person receives and the stereotypical perspective that the blind are incapable of learning STEM-related subjects. Besides, they are also stuck in dead-end jobs. There is a large percentage of the working blind community are working in jobs that have no prospect or advancement or even career development. This is because the perception of the society at large is that a blind person is less capable or skilled than a sighted person. Thus, the only opportunities that are open to them are menial jobs where the pay is low and the working hours are long. Thirdly, there is a lack of essential services provided to the blind and the visually impaired. The blind often face difficulties in regards to getting to hospitals as well as clinics and subsequently navigating around them. This is because even in medical facilities, there are little to no navigation systems in place to help the visually impaired find their way around. It is also unfair that they are unable to obtain medical insurance because they are considered a high-risk community. Furthermore, the visually impaired frequently have no access to housing equipped with proper accessibility features. The architecture of residential buildings do not consider the needs of the disabled. As the visually impaired are also considered economically disadvantaged, they face difficulties in securing loans and acquiring property as a consequence. The blind also consider banking as a difficulty. This is because the blind are not allowed to have access to ATM cards due to the perception that they will easily be taken advantage of. They also find it difficult to secure loans because they do not have permanent employment or a stable income. Last but not least, the blind and visually impaired also face the challenge of mobility. The pedestrian crossings are not safe for blind people to cross. The incorrect laying of tactile blocks can cause the blind to collide with objects such as trees. Besides, the blocking of pedestrian walkway by vehicles or other objects obstructs the blind's path too. In addition, unkempt pavements can cause the visually impaired to slip or trip. Low-hanging branches or architecture can cause collision and injury to the blind too. Moving on, I will talk about the impact that the social inequalities the blind and visually impaired face have on society as a whole. First of all, when the visually impaired don't participate actively in the society, it poses a financial burden on the community. This is because the public institutions have to provide for their well-being due to the fact that the visually impaired individuals find it difficult to survive economically as they struggle from mobility and independence. Their lack of participation also propagates ableism and stereotypes, as able citizens are unable to interact often with the blind. This causes the misunderstandings about the blind to spread. Consequently, people will discriminate against them and treat them unfairly, which causes a divide among the community. You might ask, why does this need to change, and why do we have to develop the necessary tools and technology to enable the disabled to live like the able? Until we are able to cater to minorities, we are not mature and advanced as a society. A mature society is concerned about the well-being of all its citizens, including the disabled. I sincerely hope that all of us can become aware and raise awareness about the issues of the disabled so that they as a minority can have a voice. We can be the change makers by helping the blind and visually impaired gain back their independence and mobility. All of us are blessed to be Malaysians, and I feel so fortunate to live in such a wonderful country. I strongly believe that all youths can make Malaysia a better place by coming together to achieve SDG 4, quality education, and SDG 10, reduce inequalities. As the saying goes, united we stand, divided we fall. And that brings us to the end. I'd like to thank all of you for your time and attention today.